What would you do if your child's future depended on a single court decision? Alicia was about to expose a dark secret that would shock everyone in the courtroom. Where are you listening to this story from? Stay tuned for the full story. Don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling tales like this. Part 1, The Battle for Custody. It was a day that had been marked on Alicia's calendar for months, the day her life, and that of her son, would be decided in a courtroom. The judge, a respected man named John Crawford, had a reputation for fairness. His judgments were known for being harsh, but just. Today, however, Alicia felt something was off. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, as the legal battle for custody of her 5-year-old son, Jamal, reached its climax. Alicia had always been a dedicated mother. She'd worked tirelessly to provide for Jamal, holding down 2 jobs while her ex-husband, Mark, spent more time in bars than caring for their child. Mark, on the other hand, came from a wealthy family with connections that stretched far and wide. He had hired a top-tier lawyer, someone who specialized in family law, and he was determined to win. Alicia couldn't help but notice the way Judge Crawford seemed to favor Mark's side. His glares toward her were cold, and whenever she spoke, he seemed to cut her off or ignore her entirely. The evidence was on her side, she had proof of Mark's neglect and his unstable lifestyle, but it was as if the judge wasn't even listening. The turning point came when Crawford ruled against her, granting temporary custody of Jamal to Mark. The words hit Alicia like a slap to the face. She sat frozen for a moment, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Her world crumbled around her, the one thing she had worked so hard to protect slipping away from her grasp. Mark's lawyer, a smug look on his face, leaned over to congratulate his client. But Alicia wasn't ready to give up just yet. She knew she couldn't let her son go back into the hands of someone who would only harm him. There had to be something more to this decision, something she could uncover, something that would turn the tide in her favor. Part 2, The Judge's Past. After the hearing, Alicia was left with nothing but the sound of her heartbeat in her ears. She was a mother who had just lost her son, and her hands trembled as she clutched her purse, thinking about what to do next. But Alicia wasn't the kind of person to back down easily. She started to dig into Judge Crawford's background. She spent hours at the library, poring over old newspapers, searching for any hint of a scandal. It wasn't long before she found something, a hidden story buried deep in the archives of a local paper. It was a small article from over a decade ago, barely a blip in the public eye at the time. It described a tragic event, a car accident that had involved Judge Crawford. The article mentioned how the judge had been driving drunk, causing the death of a young woman and her child. The details were fuzzy, but Alicia's heart sank as she read on. Crawford had been arrested and charged, but the case had mysteriously been dropped. This was no ordinary accident. The young woman, it turned out, had been black. Her family had never been able to afford the kind of legal representation that could have brought justice. Instead, Judge Crawford's career had continued to soar, his public image untouched by the scandal. Alicia's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she searched for more. The deeper she dug, the more she uncovered. There were rumors of Crawford's ties to wealthy donors who had protected him. And there was something else. Crawford had been seen on multiple occasions at exclusive clubs, surrounded by wealthy white men who held power in the city. It seemed that his success had come with a price, one that Alicia couldn't ignore. Part 3, The Exposé. Armed with this new information, Alicia knew she couldn't just let the judge's decision stand. She contacted a local journalist, Marcus Lewis, who had made a name for himself exposing corruption in the city. She shared her findings with him, and after some investigation, Marcus uncovered even more damning evidence. Judge Crawford's connections to shady political figures and his past history of preferential treatment for the wealthy began to surface. The final piece of the puzzle came when Alicia uncovered a series of emails between Crawford and Mark's lawyer. They detailed a meeting where Mark's lawyer had promised to take care of the custody battle, and Crawford had agreed to rule in Mark's favor in exchange for a large donation to his re-election campaign. It was clear now that the decision to grant Mark custody wasn't based on what was best for Jamal, it was a transaction, a business deal made at the expense of a child's future. With the journalists' help, Alicia went public with the story. The media coverage exploded. People were shocked by the revelations, and public opinion turned sharply against Judge Crawford. His reputation, once untarnished, began to unravel before his eyes. The pressure mounted. Protests erupted outside the courthouse, demanding justice for Alicia and her son. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the judge's career came to a screeching halt. The city's leaders, once loyal to Crawford, distanced themselves. His ties to Mark's lawyer and the corruption within the court system were too much to ignore. Part 4, A New Beginning. The court quickly called for a new hearing, and this time, the atmosphere was different. The public outrage had reached a boiling point, and Judge Crawford was removed from the case. Alicia, now armed with a team of lawyers who were committed to justice, found herself in front of a new judge, one who had no ties to the corruption that had previously plagued the court system. The hearing was long, but this time, Alicia's side was heard. Mark, stripped of his legal advantage and public support, had no choice but to back down. In the end, Alicia was granted full custody of Jamal. The victory was bittersweet, knowing that her son had already suffered so much during the months of uncertainty. But for Alicia, it was a new beginning. Her fight for justice had not only brought her son back to her, but it had also exposed the dark underbelly of the system that had failed her in the first place. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. Part 5, The Fallout. In the days following Alicia's victory, the city seemed to be in a state of shock. People were still grappling with the scale of the corruption that had been exposed. The media coverage of the scandal continued to dominate the news cycles, and there were heated debates on the state of the justice system. As more and more people came forward with their own stories of questionable rulings by Judge Crawford, it became clear that this was just the tip of the iceberg. Judge Crawford was officially removed from his position, and an investigation was launched into his past actions. But even as the legal community turned its back on him, the damage was already done. His reputation, once so carefully crafted, was shattered beyond repair. The public outcry reached a fever pitch, demanding accountability for what had happened in Alicia's case and others like it. For Alicia, it was a bittersweet victory. While the media celebrated her as a hero, she knew the real battle had been fought for her son's future. Jamal had endured enough uncertainty for one lifetime. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of interviews and press conferences, but Alicia tried to keep it all in perspective. Her son was home, safe in her arms, and that was all that mattered. But the dark cloud that had loomed over her for so long didn't dissipate easily. There were nights when Alicia would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events in her mind. The betrayal of the court, the way her ex-husband had used his wealth and influence to try and take her son from her, and the ugliness of the system that had failed her, it was a lot to process. Part 6, A Personal Reckoning. The phone rang late one evening, breaking Alicia out of her thoughts. It was Marcus Lewis, the journalist who had helped expose Judge Crawford's past. "Alicia, there's something you need to know," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "I've just received a tip that Crawford might not be the only one involved in this. I've found a link between some of the people who've been influencing custody battles across the city, and there's a name that keeps coming up. It's Mark. Your ex-husband." Alicia felt her heart drop into her stomach. "What do you mean? What does Mark have to do with this?" "Crawford wasn't acting alone," Marcus explained. "He's been working with a network of powerful people who have been using the legal system for their own gain. Mark's name has come up in several of the documents I've uncovered. He's been funneling money to certain judges, making sure that his interests, whether it's custody of Jamal or other business dealings, are protected." Alicia's mind raced. Could this be true? She had always known Mark was underhanded, but to this extent. The thought sent a chill down her spine. "I need to meet you in person," Alicia said, her voice trembling. "This has to be stopped." Part 7, The Reckoning. The next day, Alicia and Marcus met in a quiet cafe. The journalist showed her the documents he had uncovered, the emails, the records, the proof that Mark had been working behind the scenes to manipulate the system in his favor. It was a revelation that shook Alicia to her core. Mark, once the man she had trusted, had been playing a dangerous game. He had used her, and their son, as pawns in his pursuit of power and wealth. But Alicia wasn't going to let him get away with it, not this time. With Marcus's help, Alicia took the evidence to the authorities. She filed a formal complaint against Mark, detailing his involvement in the corrupt network that had been manipulating the judicial system. But she didn't stop there. She went public with the information, using the media to shine a spotlight on the corruption that had been allowed to fester for far too long. The investigation into Mark's actions was swift. He was arrested on charges of bribery, fraud, and conspiracy. The legal community, still reeling from the Crawford scandal, was now forced to confront the reality of the corruption that had plagued the courts. The city, once proud of its legal system, was now grappling with the fallout of the revelations. Part 8, Redemption. Months passed, and Alicia's life began to return to some semblance of normalcy. The media frenzy had died down, and her son, Jamal, was finally thriving in a stable home. Alicia had fought tooth and nail to bring justice to her son, and in the end, she had prevailed. But the journey hadn't been easy. It had taken a toll on her mental and emotional well-being, and there were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable. However, Alicia found solace in knowing that her fight had changed things for the better. She had exposed the system's flaws, and she had helped bring justice to others who had been wronged. As she sat with Jamal one evening, reading him a bedtime story, Alicia thought about the journey she had taken. She had lost so much, but in the end, she had gained more than she could have ever imagined, a future filled with hope and the promise of a better life for her son. And as for Mark, he was left to face the consequences of his actions. His wealth and power had failed to protect him, and the justice he had thought was out of reach had finally caught up to him. Alicia had won. And in doing so, she had given Jamal the greatest gift of all, the chance to grow up in a world where justice, no matter how long it took, would always prevail.